The best thing you can say to a victim of child sexual abuse or of sexual assault is, I believe you. That's by far the best thing that you can say. The worst thing you can say is, I don't believe you. And so the Department of Justice and the FBI are saying that they don't believe hundreds of girls. And that's abhorrent to me.
Hi, I'm John Kiriakou, and welcome back to Deep Focus. The Jeffrey Epstein story is the biggest story in the country right now. And it's kind of crazy because it's about 20 years old. But it seems like every day that goes by, we hear a new revelation. And now the one person convicted and jailed for sex crimes against children in this case, the pimp, essentially, Ghislaine Maxwell, is looking at the idea of a presidential pardon. This thing is complicated. It's more complicated than we realize. There are very clear-cut good guys and bad guys. And we're going to talk with the country's leading expert. I don't say those words lightly. The country's leading expert on the Jeffrey Epstein case. That's Nick Bryant. He is a prominent journalist and author. He is the author of a whole bunch of acclaimed books, including The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse and betrayal, and his latest book, The Truth About Watergate, a tale of extraordinary lies and liars. And he's particularly well known as the leading expert on this case, who actually owned and released the Epstein Black Book. Nick, thank you so much for being with us. This is really exciting for me.
Great to be with you, John.
Thank you. And there's so much to ask you. I'm not even sure where to begin. So I guess the most logical place is to start at the beginning. You wrote in the Sheer Post back in 2021 that Jeffrey Epstein had been known to the FBI as a likely pedophile all the way back in 1995. 96. But law enforcement took no interest in this case until 2005. Why was that?
Maria Farmer was the first alleged victim to come forward, and she came forward in 1996, and she has said that she went to the New York police and they directed her to the FBI. And she spilled the beans to the FBI, and there was nothing, radio silence. And then in 2005, this is kind of where the neutron goes into the plutonium. A 14-year-old girl told her mother that she had been molested by Jeffrey Epstein. And her mother and father brought her to the Palm Beach Police Department. And at that point, the Palm Beach Police just looked upon Epstein as a rich philanthropic type. But she described the interior of his home and also his anatomy. And she was from not a poor background, but a lower socioeconomic background. And the police believed her, and they quickly found, when they started to investigate, other victims. And by the time they served a search warrant on Epstein in 2005, and they had the statements of 5 minors and also 17 corroborating statements. They knew of 23 victims, but they were going to start with those 5. And it was 4 counts of unlawful sexual activity with a minor and 1 count of lewd and lascivious molestation, which could have potentially landed Epstein in prison for a very long time. But then that case was taken away from them and given to a grand jury. And in Florida, generally grand juries are reserved for capital offenses. So something was fishy right off the bat. And I don't know if your audience is familiar with how grand juries work, but a special prosecutor is chosen to oversee a grand jury. And grand jurors are just people that have shown up for jury duty and been funneled to a grand jury. And the special prosecutor calls the witnesses that he or she deems as important and shows the evidence that he or she deems as important. And there was a New York Supreme Court judge that said special prosecutors of grand juries have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. And that was definitely the case with the Epstein grand jury, because that special prosecutor, Lana Belovic, only called two victims. One had been 14 when she was molested by Jeffrey Epstein, and she was now 16. And one was 16 when she'd been molested by Jeffrey Epstein multiple times. And she was now 18. So that grand jury just went by her lead, and she basically skewered both the girls, and was actually calling one a prostitute. I
Oh
mean,
my God.
I've got the transcripts. It was really, really horrible. And that grand jury was a ham sandwich. It found that Jeffrey Epstein hadn't molested a single minor. And the real hero in this story is Michael Ryder. He was the chief of the Palm Beach Police Department. He was threatened, he was followed, and there was a terror campaign against him, but he refused to back down. And when that grand jury didn't return any indictments of child abuse against Jeffrey Epstein, he became quite vociferous and went to the Department of Justice. And at that time, Alexander Acosta was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. And he said, "You've got to do something about this." And Alexander Acosta assured Ryder that he would. And then all of a sudden, there was radio silence. And what was happening was Team Epstein was negotiating a very, very dirty deal with the U.S. attorney. And I've got emails between the assistant U.S. attorney and Epstein lawyer Jay Lefkowitz. And the deal that they put together is so dirty that she says that we got to go to this magistrate. A magistrate is one step below a judge in the judiciary, and they can perform the function of judges. She said, we've got to go to this particular magistrate. He will sign it. So they went to that particular magistrate, and he signed it. And then the feds sealed the agreement. And lawyers for the victims at that point, and also the Palm Beach Post, appealed the sealing. And Palm Beach judge Kenneth Mara decided that that documentation should be unsealed. And then the feds appealed Mara's ruling, and then was ultimately settled in the 11th Circuit, which said unseal it. So the 11th Circuit unsealed it, and what was it was an abomination, really. It gave all of Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators, and it named four of them. It gave all of Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators blanket immunity. And it circumvented the Victim Crimes Rights Act, which is it's a federal law. And anytime, if you're a victim in a federal court, the feds have to apprise you of the adjudication of your perpetrator. And you also get to confront your perpetrator. But the feds just trampled on that. So they had the state make a deal with Epstein, and he got 18 months in county jail. He had to do 13, but he was let out during the day to molest little girls. And Alexander Acosta was being vetted by the Trump administration. And he said, why did you give him such a lenient deal? And Acosta said, I was told Epstein was intelligence, and I had to back down. And I've talked to various legal scholars about this. There's only two people in the government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the attorney general, and one is the president. Now, Alexander Acosta, as a U.S. attorney, isn't going to cover up a nationwide pedophile network. He's not going to go out on a limb unless his superior says cover it up. And Alberto Gonzalez, as the attorney general, isn't going to cover up a nationwide pedophile network and go out on a limb unless his superior says cover it up. So ultimately, that cover up lands at the foot of George Bush, too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, when I was in prison, I was in a low security prison for 23 months after blowing the whistle on the CIA's torture program. Most pedophiles in the federal prison system are in low security prisons. They can't go to the minimum because they'll just walk away and molest more children. They can't go to the maximum or the medium because they're going to be beaten, killed, shanked, whatever. So they're all in the low, almost all in the low. But most of these guys who committed crimes very, very similar to the crimes that Jeffrey Epstein committed have sentences of 20, 25, 30 years. And Epstein got this sweetheart deal. So I want to ask you about Acosta. I actually feel a little bit bad for Acosta because I think that what happened to him is exactly as you just described. This was not his decision. He didn't just wake up one morning and say, you know what? I'm going to protect a national pedophile ring today. I believe that he was instructed to do so. And I also agree with you that it had to come from the top, from George W. Bush. I have no idea why. But let's talk for a second about that word intelligence. That's exactly what Acosta said. He said that Epstein was intelligence. That could mean a lot of different things. That could mean CIA, which doesn't make much sense to me. But it could mean Mossad, which makes a lot of sense to me. I was on the Piers Morgan show a few weeks ago, and I got into a little tiff with Alan Dershowitz. He said something, and I think he said it because he was angry, because it made no sense. And when you're a professor emeritus of law at Harvard University Law School, you shouldn't make silly mistakes like this. But I said that I believed that that Epstein was an Israeli access agent, right? You're not going to, if you're the Israeli Mossad, you're not going to recruit Bill Clinton. You're not going to recruit, George Mitchell or Prince Andrew or whomever. So you do the next best thing. You recruit the person next to those people who can then report back to you. And in exchange, you're helping to finance this lavish lifestyle. So Dershowitz exploded. And he said, I was Jeffrey Epstein's attorney. If he had been intelligence, I could have used that to get him a lighter sentence. And I said, a lighter sentence? I said, Professor, with all due respect, if you had gone to court and said, you should give him a lighter sentence because he's spying for a foreign country, I would have expected to see him hanging from a tree instead. So what do you think? Do you think we're looking at a foreign intelligence service? Do you think we're looking at Mossad? There are these connections that are well known between Ghislaine Maxwell and her father and the Israeli Mossad. Should we just assume the same about Epstein?
Well, with Epstein, he met with William Burns, who would become the head of the CIA in 2014. I think they met 3 times. Jeez. And why would someone, a career diplomat, who would later be the director of the CIA, why would he meet with and at that point, Epstein was a convicted pedophile. So, and we've never gotten a straight answer about that. When people ask me about the Mossad, I generally say, and you've got some expertise in this area, I generally say that the Mossad very well might have been working with Jeffrey Epstein, but I can't imagine that the CIA would not, if the Mossad was compromising American politicians on American soil, I don't think that the CIA would just be cool with that. I think that the CIA would want a cut of that intelligence. And I think the fact that Bush 2 covered it up is an indication that it was the CIA. Would Bush 2 have gone to bat for the Mossad? We don't know, but he certainly would have gone to bat for the CIA.
See, that's the part that doesn't make any sense to me. He probably wouldn't have gone to bat for Mossad. There would have been no reason for him to do that. But to go to bat for the CIA, of course, when you're the president of the United States and your father was the director of the CIA before becoming president of the United States, what I don't understand, and this is one of those questions that really has no answer unless it's buried deep in some kind of classified folder. I don't understand what intelligence Epstein could have given the CIA that the CIA didn't already have access to. That's what it confuses me. But you're right. There are so many different fingers pointing in the direction of American intelligence versus Israeli or other foreign intelligence.
I spent 7 years writing the Franklin scandal, which is the Epstein scandal is kind of a carbon copy of the Franklin scandal. And those grand juries said that there were 2 of them, state and federal, said that those perpetrators hadn't molested a single kid. And then they indicted the kids that wouldn't recant their accounts of abuse, 2 of them. But I got very deep into it. And I ultimately got in touch with a blackmail photographer. And that's not a job description that elicits a high degree of ethics. So I was very cautious with what he said. And I do believe, I talked to him at various times, and I do believe initially he was being pretty honest with me. I think at a certain point, he started to be dishonest with me, and I told him that, and I haven't talked to him too much since, but I like his analogy. He's an unctuous guy, but he was a smart guy. He said, once you're compromised, it's like you're on a yacht, and it's a beautiful yacht, and it's a beautiful day, and you can have anything you want on that yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, people are going to make sure that you drown. The people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown. And I think that that's the case with Epstein. But I also think there might have been blackmail activities. I mean, he definitely provided like George Mitchell. I think he was one of the perpetrators. You mentioned him. He was the Senate Majority Leader. I believe that Epstein provided underage girls to George Mitchell, which is, when you look at him, he looks like a benign grandfatherly type.
Sure.
You would never peg him as a pedophile. But with all the cameras in his homes, in his New York home, there was a secret room, very much like the Franklin scandal. And the secret room had multiple monitors. And one of the alleged victims said that Epstein showed her the room and that there were men, as in plural, looking at the monitors. And then Virginia Giuffre said that she had also seen that room. So I think that there was also a blackmail enterprise. I think he was providing children to the people on the yacht, but I think that also there was a potential for blackmail also.
I want to ask you about the black books, because they've been in the news a lot lately. And much to my surprise, I get these automated emails from auction houses all the time. I love looking at auction catalogs. And so there's an auction house on the eastern shore of Maryland called Alexander Auctions. And 3 or 4 weeks ago, they had what they called the Epstein Black Book. And it was estimated to sell for between $80,000 and $120,000. And it passed. Nobody wanted it. You actually acquired the Black Book, or at least a Black Book that belonged to Epstein. Yes. And it has a very interesting story behind it. Can you tell us how you ended up with that Black Book and why was it so important?
Alfredo Rodriguez was Jeffrey Epstein's house manager, and he purloined the Black Book. And he had been deposed, and he was asked if he had any evidence that could contribute to the Fed's case. And he had said no. And then he tried to sell the Black Book to one of the attorneys that was launching civil suits at Jeffrey Epstein. So the attorney called the FBI, and the FBI did a sting because Rodriguez had lied about the Black Book. And he had called the Black Book, he wanted $50,000 for it, and he called it the Holy Grail of Jeffrey Epstein, of the Epstein network. And I got it in 2012, and it was my first jaunt to Florida. And I was there for about 3 weeks, knocking on doors, talking to people, and I was able to get it. And in the Black Book, Alfredo Rodriguez circled people that he said were in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein as far as his pedophilic pandering. And Virginia Giuffre, in her sworn deposition, she corroborated a number of those names. So with the Black Book, I initially started to call victims. There's a bunch of victims in the Black Book, and I wanted to know how big this was. And most of them didn't want to talk to me, but some of them did. And they were telling me about being flown around the country and flown to an island. And at that point, Jeffrey Epstein was a lone pedophile. There wasn't any talk of his collusion with other people. So I was pretty stunned by that. Although it looked eerily similar to Franklin. But I was still stunned by it. And so I brought it back to New York City, which is where I live, the mecca of publishing. And I tried to sell the Black Book in an article on the Black Book. and no one wanted to touch it. And no one. And then it took me 3 years before a platform, Gawker, was willing to publish it. And at that point, I had flight logs. I was the first guy to release the flight logs, too. And I wrote some articles on it. And it's kind of strange. I just wanted to get it published. I mean, it had been rejected by everyone. And I thought, Gawker, I might as well, because it was a fairly big website. I had no idea that it would be like epic, like it turned out to be. But what's interesting about that, only 2 media have acknowledged, tons of ink have been spilled on articles about the Black Book, but only 2 publications have acknowledged that I was the guy that released it. They've still stayed away from me.
Just crazy. Just crazy.
And I've got there's someone who's helping me now. He's volunteering his time, and he has a lot of media connections. And I had dinner with him about 2 weeks ago. And he said to me, as a journalist, you're radioactive. So.
I just heard yesterday that I'm a Russian stooge. So welcome to the club. I want to ask you too, if I could, about no, go ahead.
I mean, there's a lot of knuckleheads floating around the internet. You don't know if they're knuckleheads or they're actually working for some deep malignant part of our government. And someone said that I was a CIA agent, and why would I release a Black Book and redact no names? If I was actually CIA, I would have been redacting some names. So I get a kick out of it.
Yeah. People are not as smart as they want us to believe they are. I want to ask you about Ghislaine Maxwell. I'm utterly perplexed by this whole situation. At the end of the day, she's the only person that was convicted of a crime here besides Epstein. And Epstein, of course, having died in the MDC Brooklyn, was never, convicted or sentenced in the second iteration of his charges. She was convicted and got 20 years. 20 years is a very long time. She's doing it in a very comfortable minimum security prison because if you're a female pedophile, which is very unusual, you can go to a minimum security, not if you're a male. But now, at least this week, she's the darling of the Justice Department. The president won't rule out pardoning her. A child sex predator, pardoning her. What should we make of all this?
Well, I mean, she really got lucky. The charges, she was indicted on conspiracy to entice minors to travel and engage in illegal sex acts, conspiracy to transport minors to participate in illegal sex acts, transporting a minor to participate in illegal sex acts, sex trafficking conspiracy, and sex trafficking a minor. That's a heavy sentence in the federal system, sex trafficking a minor. That's 15 to life. And this just shows how screwy this case is. She was indicted on 3 conspiracies, but no one else was indicted. And
so where was the conspiracy? Unbelievable.
What's that?
So where was the conspiracy? You can't be the only person involved in a conspiracy.
And now the feds are saying Jeffrey Epstein acted alone. So according to the feds, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell didn't molest children together, which definitely isn't true.
Which we know is not true. Yeah.
And the Trump administration keeps getting itself in trouble. And on February 7th, our Attorney General Pam Bondi, or February 26th, she said that she was going to release all the Epstein files. And then what she released was really a nothing sandwich. When I released the Black Book, we redacted the adults' numbers and we redacted the victim's last name and their numbers. And I saw a rendition of the Black Book that I put up that she released to the quote unquote influencers, and every name was redacted. So she didn't provide us with any new revelations. And then she said that she'd been bamboozled by the FBI, the New York FBI field office. So she's telling us that she's going on national television. She's telling us that she's going to release everything. And then she says that she's been bamboozled by the FBI. And so either she's lying when she was on national television, either she was lying or she's inept. And I'm a charitable person, so I just said she was inept. But then she kept on digging herself into a deeper hole. She declared that the documents would be released, but matters of national security would be redacted. So now she has to tell us why a bunch of child molesters have anything to do with national security, which she didn't. And the crescendo of her mendacity came on May 7th when she said that she said, I'll quote her, there are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child porn, and there are hundreds of victims. And she said that they were just going through it at that point. But the FBI couldn't open Jeffrey Epstein's safe fast enough. The morning after he was arrested, the FBI opened up his safe. And according to the New York Times, there were lots of discs with a lot of child abuse material. And Business Insider reported that there were hard drives. And you can bet the FBI and whatever malignant corner of government that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in, they were looking at that stuff that day. They probably did double shifts because there was a lot of it. And so for her to say that they're just now looking at it, that it's been sitting in a corner of the FBI collecting dust, that is mendacity, just outright mendacity.
She seemed to be a little bit disingenuous, too, when she made that announcement a couple of weeks ago that the videos were nothing but child pornography and they will never see the light of day. We will never release. Nobody wants you to release the child porn videos. We want to know the names of the individuals who are committing crimes against children. And we want to know why those people haven't been charged with a crime. And here we are weeks later, and there's no indication from the Justice Department that that information is going to be forthcoming.
I started a nonprofit organization called Epstein Justice, and we want two simple baseline acts of decency. When you cover up a crime, you're aiding and abetting that crime. So we want to know why the government has aided and abetted child trafficking in the Epstein case, and we want the perpetrators to be prosecuted. And it's very simple, and that's what we've been gearing up for it, and that's what we really want is an independent congressional investigation. But we can get a bead on some of the perpetrators. We can get double corroboration. Like Rodriguez circled people that he said were in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein and his pedophilic pandering. And Ghislaine Maxwell is circled, who was obviously in cahoots. And Virginia Giuffre named her as a perpetrator. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak is circled, and Virginia Giuffre named him as a perpetrator. The billionaire Les Wexner is circled, and he had a very close relationship with Epstein. Virginia Giuffre said that he was a perpetrator. Same thing with Alan Dershowitz. Dershowitz is circled, and Giuffre said that he's a perpetrator. And Bill Richardson, the former New Mexico governor, and also Clinton's Argizar, is circled, and Giuffre said that she had been molested by him. She waffled a little bit with Alan Dershowitz, and I don't know why. I think that she was leveraged. I think that there was some stuff in her family that made her susceptible to leverage. At least that's I knew Virginia, and I was really stunned when she waffled a little bit on Dershowitz, and I called one of her attorneys who I've become buddies with, and he said, "Man, I can't talk about it. I'm really sorry." So something happened there that we don't know, and hopefully we will at some point know what went on there.
I wanted to ask you too, just in the last couple of days, there have been reports that Ghislaine Maxwell, at least Ghislaine Maxwell's attorneys, may be negotiating some sort of an agreement with leaders on Capitol Hill that would allow her to testify under a grant of immunity. Immunity from what? Are there other uncharged crimes that she may be associated with?
Ghislaine Maxwell helped Epstein traffic girls for 20 to 25 years. And as I said, if you wanted to indict her on child trafficking, I mean, I don't know, 20 times, 30 times, 40 times, 50 times. There was that strange document that was released by the Department of Justice and the FBI that no one signed. It was released on July 6th, and no one signed it. No one's going to take the fall for that document. There's a couple of things I do agree with, that there was 300 gigabytes of material that was impounded from Epstein. And I also agree that there were over 1,000 victims, and there were definitely over 1,000 victims, I believe. But then that report kind of jumps the tracks of reality. It says that Jeffrey Epstein acted alone and that there wasn't any blackmail involved. So to say that Jeffrey Epstein acted alone is really egregious, because I've been writing and researching about child trafficking for over 2 decades now. And I've spoken, like the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has a World Summit every year, and I've spoken at 3 of those. I've spoken at a lot of conferences, and actually I've written on child trafficking for people that deal with dissociative identity disorder. I contributed a chapter to it, so I've gotten to know victims of these crimes pretty well over the years. And the best thing you can say to a victim of child sexual abuse or of sexual assault is, I believe you. That's by far the best thing that you can say. The worst thing you can say is, I don't believe you. And so the Department of Justice and the FBI are saying that they don't believe hundreds of girls. And that's abhorrent to me.
It certainly is. Figures are beginning to point this week at Donald Trump for a number of reasons. First of all, this statement that just seems utterly counterintuitive, that there are no files. You know, maybe there's not a file that says list of Jeffrey Epstein's sex co-conspirators. Sure, okay. I'll concede that maybe that file doesn't exist. But come on, are we in a situation here where, to paraphrase Bill Clinton, it depends on what the meaning of file is? Are there files? Right, there have to be files. What are we talking about here?
I mean, people were talking about an Epstein list, and it's not like Jeffrey Epstein ran a travel agency and he kept a list of his clients on his refrigerator with a magnet. I mean, but the Black Book names a lot of perpetrators. A lot of them are circled, but a lot of them aren't. One of the things that kind of differentiate a perpetrator from a non-perpetrator in the Black Book is the number of contacts that Epstein had for them. With Clinton, I think he had 24 contacts. And with Trump, I think he had about 12. The Trump administration is really hurting itself. It came out with that 7-6 document that said Jeffrey Epstein act alone. And then Donald Trump was blaming it on the Democrats, that it was a Democrat conspiracy. But the cover-up started under Bush too. So it wasn't a Democratic conspiracy. If you want to call it a conspiracy, it was a Republican conspiracy. And I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I have no dog in that fight. I'm just looking for the truth.
Nor do I. Mm-hmm.
So with Donald Trump saying that it was a Democrat, I mean, he's like Pam Bondi and Patel. They just keep digging themselves in a deeper and deeper and deeper hole. And when Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, came out and said that he was adjourning Congress early so it couldn't vote on Representative Massey's bill to investigate Jeffrey Epstein's child trafficking, that's kind of mind-boggling to me. And Mike Johnson, constitutionally, is the third most powerful man in the country. And for him to shut down Congress so it couldn't vote on a bill to investigate a child trafficking network, I mean, that's evil. I mean, it's nefarious. And slightly surreal too. And he is. I've been reading articles about him, and he has this software on his phone called Covenant Eye, and his 17-year-old also has the same software on his phone, and they monitor each other's use of pornography. So he's monitoring his son's use of pornography, who is 17, and the 17-year-old son is monitoring his use of pornography. And I'll say this, and you know how sophisticated the intelligence agencies are with their cyber abilities. If Johnson is looking at certain types of pornography or child abuse material, it wouldn't be hard to tell him, you've got to shut down Congress. And that's certainly within the realm of reason in this story.
You know what? I hadn't considered that, but that's a very good point. That certainly could be it. But that then leads to the next question. You've gone through this with a fine-tooth comb over the course of years. Is there anything that you've seen that would lead you to believe that Donald Trump has something to worry about personally?
Okay, Donald Trump's name is circled in the Black Book. And he was dishonest about it. He said he hadn't been to Epstein's home. He had been to Epstein's home. And he was also on Epstein's jet. There was someone named Katie Johnson who filed a lawsuit against Trump and Maxwell. And that was her pseudonym. And she said that she'd been molested by both Trump and Maxwell. And there was an accompanying affidavit too. And then she retracted her lawsuit. And I've heard multiple stories on why she might have retracted her lawsuit. We just don't know. But I looked for her and looked for her and looked for her for 3 years, and I found her.
Wow.
And because she might be a victim,
what did she have
decided
to say?
that I wasn't going. Well, here's the thing. I decided not to call her. I decided not to text her. I emailed her, and she's never got back. And this was over the course of the last 3.5 years, I've emailed her 4 times, and she's never gotten back to me. And I see that she's put together a life for herself. She's selling real estate in the Southwest. She's got a boyfriend. They go to Europe occasionally. So it's difficult to know what went on there. I would love for her to talk to me, and then I could get a bead on whether or not I felt she was telling the truth. So Katie Johnson is the only victim that we know of, underage victim, to accuse Donald Trump. But then that's such a convoluted, ambiguous tale that it's really difficult to know what the truth is with Katie Johnson.
Justice for the victims aside, I want to talk about the punishment side. Jeffrey Epstein's dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is serving a 20-year prison sentence, at least for the time being. Are there others who are at risk of being prosecuted at this point?
Absolutely. We know the names of a bunch of pimps. And the New York Times did a page article on 6 pimps. Ghislaine Maxwell was, of course, the leading pimp. But there's Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, Adriana Ross, and Nadia Marcinkova. And they knew all about that operation. They knew everything about it, all the nuances, all the perps. And just with the information in that New York Times article, they could be indicted. And they could be indicted on multiple counts of child trafficking. And if you indicted Kellen Groff, and they've been taken care of very well. Kellen, I think, has a $4 million house in Manhattan and a $3 million house, I believe, North Carolina, but don't quote me. But Kellen Groff, Ross, and Marcinkova could be indicted on multiple counts of child trafficking. And if our Department of Justice was actually going to prosecute this case, it would be kind of like a RICO case where you would indict them on multiple counts of child trafficking, which is, as I said, a heavy sentence, 15 years to life. And then they would roll over on the perps for sure. And then we've got lots of victims that would, if they could feel safe, I think that they would come forward if they could feel safe. There was the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, and there were 225 women and young women that applied for it, and 150 were given settlement, or 138 were given settlements. 12 declined because, and this is nefarious too, if you took any money at all from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, you had to sign an NDA, and you couldn't go after any of your other perpetrators, which is another indication that Jeffrey Epstein didn't act alone. And we don't even know the criteria for what goes on in that program, because a number of women have been rejected who are definitely pandered by Jeffrey Epstein and molested by Jeffrey Epstein. And this is kind of ominous. The media has just been horrible in this case. I mean, no one, they're good at digging up salacious dirt, but no one in the media has really called for justice. I'm not aware of a major media outlet that's called for justice. But the media has settled that the youngest Epstein victim was 14 years old. And I know two therapists. One's a pretty eminent psychologist, and she has a client who she believes was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein when she was under 10 years old. And I know another therapist who has a client, and she believes that her client was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein when she was under 10 years old. And actually, the first victim describes the interior of his house, his New York house. And both those therapists feel that their clients weren't given settlements because they didn't fit the cover story of 14 years or older. And that's really ominous. And with the Franklin Network, that the same thing happened. I mean, those pimps were into pubescent boys, but if you wanted a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old, they had no compunction about that. These guys are psychopaths. And Epstein was buying Epstein was buying children in Eastern Europe, which is mind-boggling to me too.
I want you, I'm going to pull it up. I want you, if you could, to tell us about a variety of websites. We've got really the most important one is nickbryantnyc.com. You've really stacked this with great articles and interviews. You have a blog. Your many books are listed. I didn't have time to mention all of the books. It's quite impressive. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 so far. But tell us where people can go to learn more. You've got Facebook, you've got X, you have a number of different outlets. Tell us about that.
The most important thing, the most important website that people should go to is EpsteinJustice.com. We're taking on the Congress, and we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we need a majority in the House and the Senate to form an independent congressional commission that would include citizens like me, people that really wanted to do the right thing. If this thing goes into a subcommittee, it's going to die. So
yeah, it'll never see the light of day. Yeah.
So we need an independent congressional, and Thomas Massey has said that he will endorse us. So that's great. And then he's put out that bill 581, and there's 34 legislators that are co-sponsoring that bill. So we're going to start calling them at this point. And what we need is to get momentum and make sure we can shame these legislators into doing the right thing. As soon as Mike Johnson made that macabre announcement, we made him the legislator of the week. We have the legislator of the week where we put up and we have people call him and call his office or his various offices. So the week before, Mike Thompson was the legislator of the week. And people think that they don't have any power and that it's impenetrable. But if a legislator gets 20 to 30 phone calls about an issue, they're going to notice that for sure.
Without any doubt. Well, I could talk to you for hours. We're going to leave it there. Nick Bryant, thank you so much for joining us. We would love to stay in touch. This thing is continuing to develop. It's like something new pops up every day or two. So thank you so much for joining us. And ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to ask you again, just like I did in the last interview and the one before, please hit the subscribe and like buttons. It doesn't cost a cent, and you can't even imagine how much that helps us. So we really appreciate it. Nick, thanks again for being on Deep Focus. We'll see you next time.
Okay, John, thanks.
Bye-bye.